All right, we are back, and let me talk about continuing on with my series on inactive champions within certain promotions. Let's talk about WWE. And here's the thing. WWE, over the course of its, 60-year history now, even longer if you want to consider the Capital Wrestling Corporation, has had 24 champions that have been inactive. We're not talking about all of them. We were going to talk about some of the ones that maybe you're unfamiliar with. Let's talk.
We're not talking about the European champions and the...
Nope. We're going to be talking about one that's important.
Right.
But I think overall, we're going to be talking about some of the ones that are later for the most part. So let's talk about the first one. If this one looks unfamiliar, you're right, it is. And you know why? Because this was actually introduced during the Capital Wrestling Corporation. And this was the WWF International Heavyweight Champion. Now, at this time, so this champion was recognized by Capital Wrestling Corporation, the World Wrestling Federation, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and the Universal Wrestling Federation. And this title existed between 1959 to 1963, and then it was reintroduced in 1982 to 1985. So there was a block in between where that didn't happen. This title was the first introduction of an international heavyweight champion in subsequent partnerships with the WWF to the Universal Wrestling Federation and New Japan Pro Wrestling. That was a big thing about that. And I think the first champion being Antonio Rocca is an indication on who they were catering to. And also, he beat Buddy Rogers for the inaugural champion on July 2nd, 1959. The problem with this is that WWF at that time did not exist yet. This was the Capital Wrestling Corporation. And they had a huge market with Brazil. They had a huge market with Italians, too, because Antonio Rocca was huge with them, absolutely massive with them. And so there weren't even 10 champions that had this title. And the reigns of most of these champions are actually not known. We don't know when they won them specifically, and we don't know when it ended specifically, because a lot of the switches with this title happened on house shows. This was never on mainstream. This was the heavyweight champion without Bruno Sammartino, essentially. Tetsuya Fujinami gave up the champion after a double disqualification, taking on Super Strong Machine. That was the actual name of the wrestler, Super Strong Machine, in 1963, and that was when the title retired. But Tsumi Fujinami held the champion for 3 reigns, and that was the most. And like I said, there was not a whole lot of information regarding the length of the reigns, so we can't really say who was the longest reigning champion. Let's talk about the title that basically replaced it, and that was the WWF World Martial Arts Champion. Now, this was created on December 18th, 1978, and it was awarded to the NJPW mainstay Antonio Inoki by Vincent J. McMahon, which was the father of Vincent K. McMahon, upon Inoki's arrival into America. So this was the consolation prize of I'm here, present sort of thing. The title was only contested under New Japan rules with legitimate fights and shoot wrestling, but it was unaffiliated with the WWF in 1985. But before that, it was. I think there were only 2 reigns, or 2 times that this title was defended on U.S. soil. Every other championship reign was either won or taken on NJPW, which was a primary, because of Antonio Inoki's jerk-off sesh to MMA, and then also in Mexico, where they actually had a working relationship with CMLL.
Cool.
Yes, during the 20th anniversary of Inoki's career, New Japan created the Greatest 18 Club, a Hall of Fame. NJPW created a new champion, the Greatest 18th Champion, and intended to complement the IWGP Heavyweight Champion. Now, this is brought up because they actually used this championship belt with licensing from the WWE as the representation of this Greatest 18th Championship because of the lineage to Antonio Inoki and also with Ricky Dozan. So that is why they use this. Now, this championship was awarded to Riki Choshu in 1990, but Choshu lost to the Great Muta in 1992, and Muta retired this champion because guess what? It was a title unification match between this champion, or the next incarnation of this, the Greatest 18 Champion, and the IWGP Heavyweight Champion. So, at that time, on September 23rd of that year in 1990, he took this title out of the lineage and defended the Heavyweight Champion of IWGP as the main champion. There were 3 separate title reigns with this champion, and there were only 2 people who held the title. Antonio Inoki, who had the longest reign at 3,780 days. But the other competitor who won this was Shota Chuzili, who was a Georgian wrestler from the country of Georgia, who actually knocked out Inoki in round 1 of a match, and he only held this title for, I think, like 30 days. And then he lost it. It was essentially a fluke win.
Right.
But because this was determined under shoot fighting rules, they had to honor that reign. So kind of an interesting little history on a very random champion that's only brought up in certain times. Now, the heavyweight champions obviously have the lineage in a couple of different places within WWE, but let's talk about the first try of tag team champions. This is the best picture that we could get of these titles. This was the WWF United States Tag Team Champions.
Nice.
These were the first versions of main tag team champions in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and it started in 1963. The thing is that these titles were created starting in late 1962, and at that time, they put the years of the creation of the champions. So if you looked at the history, especially with champions like within the NWA, even the revised champions have the date of the titles holding because that's the indicator of the lineage of the titles. So that's why that happened. Because actually these titles were late into production. So that's kind of why they were introduced in 1963, and they say 1962. And these titles were actually only put into circulation until 1967. Now, at this time, when they originally were formed, the WWF were still members of the National Wrestling Alliance, and it was operating out of the northeastern version of the NWA United States Tag Team Champions. So, the Northeastern Tag Team Champions of the NWA actually were placeholders for the WWF United States Tag Team Champions, and the titles were licensed out. And we might talk about the history on previous champion lineages just in general, because there's actually a lot of interesting facts within the context of title importance with these champions. The first title holders were a team of Mark Lewin and Don Curtis, who beat Hans Schmidt and Dick the Bruiser in a tournament finals on July of 1958. So these title holders were actually the NWA United States Tag Team Champions, and they signed with the WWF when they separated, and that's why that lineage just passes over.
Right.
There. Well, we're going to be talking about passing over here in a minute, but that's kind of what happened there. Now, the most reigns were the Grahams, which were actual brothers, and the longest reigns were the Fabulous Kangaroos at 409 days with one title reign.
Huh.
And that was actually their names, the Fabulous Kangaroos. I love it. I want a new team now called the Fabulous Kangaroos. I'd watch them. So, the final reign of the United States Tag Team Champions were a team of Bruno Sammartino and Spurious Arion. The issue here is that Bruno Sammartino was the WWF World Champion, and he could not defend both champions per the rules of the NWA. So they actually discontinued these champions because, number one, Bruno couldn't defend them, and number two, tag team wrestling in the Northeast was not doing so well. So that's why they discontinued up until they introduced other tag team champions like the World Tag Team Champions. We can't do anything else without the $1 Million Champion. And I want to talk about this for one specific reason, and that was Ted DiBiase, who actually was a holder of the WWE Champion. The problem is that people wanted him to be the WWE Champion other than Hulk Hogan. So, Ted DiBiase did not get the WWE Champion for a length of time because Hulk Hogan did not want to lose his spot. And that's also, as a subsequent, that's why Jake Roberts did not have a program with Hulk Hogan, because Jake Roberts became popular when he DDT'd Hulk Hogan. He got cheered.
Right.
Now, as a consolation prize, WWE actually did, so that jeweler in New York City, they actually did make this championship. That was not kayfabe. And they spent $30,000 in the 90s on this championship, which was the $1 Million Champion. Ted DiBiase obviously was the guy who held this champion and is so infamous now with Ted DiBiase. But we also had Virgil, who became incredibly popular when he beat Ted DiBiase for this title. And then it was retired after DiBiase won it back because he was about to retire, because actually they got Ted DiBiase a lot later in his career than they wanted to. And then obviously they brought it back with his son, Ted DiBiase Jr., and then they retired it again. And then it came back with the LA Knight and Cameron Grimes rivalry, which honestly was unnecessary.
And then it was retired again.
Right. So kind of a cool little history. This was actually one of the most expensive championships ever at that time of creation. And it was actually made by a non-reputable champion, not Reggie Parks, not Belt Van Dam, love the guy, not JB Toys, who made Goldie. This was made by a non-wrestling fan jeweler. He just got paid a lot of money for it.
Right.
And I think actually that jeweler still exists to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk about one, and we're going to end with this one, and that was the WWF Women's Champion.
Now, which WWF Women's Champion?
This was OG. That was
So this was up until Alundra Blaze put in the trash, right?
No.
Oh.
So they brought it back after that because there were three.
So which one?
There were three different title reigns with the WWF Women's Champion.
Right.
We have the introduction with the Fabulous Moolah, who won the title back on September 18th, 1956. But the issue is WWE did not exist in 1956. Mm-hmm. So when they signed the Fabulous Moolah, she brought over the NWA Women's World Champion, And the championship lineage, according to WWE, started when she won the NWA Women's Champion and ended in 1984.
Oh.
So that's why she has that 27-day reign, because they had that, and the Fabulous Moolah had the infamous stranglehold on women's wrestling at that time. Now, the champion that you see here was not the original WWF Women's Champion. This was the one after the Fabulous Moolah lost the title.
Right, and so when did this particular title end?
So this one obviously ended in 1993.
Was that Alundra Blaze was 95, right? 96?
Yes. So here's the thing. So Rockin' Robin became inactive with the original lineage of the WWF Women's Champion. And in 1993, it was reactivated when Alundra Blaze won a tournament to win the championship that you see there. And when she left and threw a different version of the Women's Champion in the trash, that's when that happened. So then it was brought back for the Attitude Era around that time, and then it was deactivated when it was unified with the Divas Champion. And then the current Raw Women's Champion was the start of a new lineage, despite it being named the same.
Right.
Now, if you want to count Fabulous Moolah's 27-day reign as your reign. Did I say day?
Yeah.
I meant year. So if you want to count as one full reign, she had 5 reigns. But if you want to count the times that she actually lost the champion, she had 7. She ties with Trish Stratus with 7 reigns with this lineage of champion. But that's if you're counting the differences. But then you would have to separate out the times that she lost, or the 27-year reign of hers. Now, the shortest reign was Mickie James when she won it in a Paris house show accidentally on April 24th, 2007.
So wait. Hold on. Is this all the same reign?
This was all the same lineage.
This is so there were only. So what you're saying then is that. Well, hold on here. Which version of the women's champion are we talking about? Are we talking about the first version, the second version, or the third version? Because obviously Mickie James' 2007 reign was the third version.
So here's the thing. The lineage of the women's champion, even through those different incarnations, did not stop the history.
Oh, it did not.
No.
So then it was just when Alundra Blaze threw in the trash, it just became vacant.
Yes, it became inactive until they brought it back, and then it was vacated. That was the only difference.
Oh, okay.
So
I was unsure. So we're talking about the women's championship
up until it was unified with the Divas Champion.
Okay,
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page.
Yes,
with
yes.
that.
All of that is the same exact thing
Right, okay.
up until it was unified with the Divas Champion.
Right. It's kind of like the Impact Women's. It's the Impact Knockouts Tag Team Champions, which were 2 different titles, but they were the same incarnation.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Exactly.
Just want to make sure. Because the current Raw Women's Champion carries the lineage from the Divas Champion, not from the original
No, actually, it doesn't.
Women's Champion.
No, it doesn't. It started a brand new lineage at that time.
Like at WrestleMania, what was it?
Yep,
29 or 30 or something like. It was like really. It was like.
It was really early. Yeah, it was. I don't even think it wasn't a 30. No, I think it was like 32.
Yeah, like when Charlotte Flair won, that's when that championship.
Yes, that's when the Divas Champion was retired, and they started a brand new lineage with the Women's Champion.
It was because there wasn't a brand split at the time.
No, there was not. So that is, it's really confusing. Like, there's a lot that goes on into champions, and we'll talk about this more because a lot of it is really interesting. So anyway, back to what I was saying. Mickie James had the shortest reign. Obviously, we don't really need to go into who had the longest reign. That was a Fabulous Moolah. If you want to consider a part of WWE's lineage, which was the 27-year reign. But even without that, the Fabulous Moolah would still have the longest reign as women's champion, despite that fact. Mickie James held the women's champion for an hour during a UK tour. She won it in Paris, and the active general manager, Jonathan Coachman, actually reinstated the champion or had the champion back on the line, and then she lost it again. So that was actually the shortest reign with the women's champion. Now, there was a male winner of the women's champion, and that was Harvey Whippleman, who went into it and beat the Cat, disguised as Hervina, in a Lumberjill Snow Bunny match. Man, this fucking title really came from something, doesn't it? And that's kind of what happened there. And it was surrounded by female wrestlers who were in a pool, and the loser was thrown out of the ring into said pool. That's what happened. Because boobies. That's pretty much it. No. Like, legitimately, that's what happened. So the women's division became inactive in 1990 after Rockin' Robin's reign. So the title lineage stopped there. And then Alundra Blaze won the champion. It was reactivated in 1993. And then she left. But when it came back, and then Chyna, when she won the women's champion, they're actually thinking about deactivating the title again when she departed from the company. She was women's champion when she departed from the WWF. So the women's champion's a mess as a part of lineages, because a lot of it was before the WWE existed, and maybe we'll do a separate video, but this has gone on for way too long. But WWE has such an interesting lineages with champions, and those aren't even the weirdest ones. So when we come back, we're not only going to make WWE and WrestleMania Backlash majestic again, but we're going to make pro wrestling majestic again.